Okay, Mayor.
Good evening. This meeting is being held in accordance with the public laws of 1975, Chapter 231. And adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by a notice sent to the Asbury Park Press, Two River Times, and Star Ledger, and posted in the main lobby of the municipal building and on the municipal website. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Bonnie.
Mayor Portman,
Here.
Councilmember Bonatakis. Here. Councilmember Cassidy,
Here.
Councilmember Macy Wellwood. Here. Councilmember Forrest,
Present.
Councilmember Janone. Present. Councilmember Triviano. Here.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're supposed to open up with a presentation by Michelle Donato on the Historic Preservation Commission. I don't think she is here yet, so
For me, she's close by entering the town.
she's close by. Okay, good. I guess we can move, well, the next thing we'd have up then is public comment, so but people are gonna probably want to comment on Michelle's presentation. Maybe.
Sure.
No.
No,
All right.
I don't,
I haven't
better,
met her,
so.
If there's anything, I guess I'm going to. We're gonna adjourn until Michelle gets here, because I definitely want to hear what she has to say, but I don't want to jump to anything else
And Greg's just arrived.
until that. Okay, well, Greg's okay here, so do I have to make a motion to temporarily adjourn? What would be the best
Make a motion that we temporarily adjourn, Mayor.
until Michelle arrives?
Michelle Donato gets here, 'cause I'd like to hear a report certainly. I know.
Yeah.
I think that's respectful to the public.
Okay, so can I get a second on that?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're just gonna hang tough till the attorney gets here, and then we'll get started again. Howdy. Motion to re-adjourn,
I make a motion that we adjourn.
reopen, right?
Second.
Evans?
Whatever. Okay,
All in favor?
we're not gonna.
All right. Michelle, thank you for being here. We waited for you. Everyone's anxious to hear what you have to say. It's, so it was my understanding that right before this election, and you want to sit, relax, take a minute, you want some water or something?
Oh, good.
All right. So right before this election, the HBC had contacted you to draw up new bylaws to, for lack of a better word, empower. There seemed like the HBC was in this middle ground, right, where it wasn't empowered to do what it wanted to do. I'm sure you'll be able to explain it better. So yeah, we're anxious to hear about it. And just to be clear, no one was talking about disbanding the HBC. What was on the table for us was either empowering it more or returning it to advisory to the planning board. So anxious to hear what you have to say about it.
So you have an ordinance that has been worked on over the years, and it's rather obvious.
Sure, can everyone hear?
Microphone is not.
You just gotta get really close to that microphone.
So you have an ordinance, and there's several versions. The ordinance was adopted, it was amended, it was adopted again. So there's a lot of changes that had taken place. And I'm a land use lawyer, so I start from premise number one, that the municipal land use law is the guiding principles with which we must act when adopting ordinances. So when I reviewed your ordinances, it appeared that the consistency with the land use law was not accurate. So I wanted to clarify that particular issue because really it's an unusual statute that was adopted in 1985 to empower municipalities to regulate historic preservation. And it's really a hybrid statute. Part of the role of a commission, Historic Preservation Commission, is purely advisory. Advisory to a planning board, advisory to the zoning board on applications for development. Where the unique hybrid nature comes into play is with respect to these, what's called certificates of appropriateness in local ordinances, but they really, that's not a statutory term. Statute just uses the word permit. So when you regulate historic sites or districts, the land use law says that you must provide for the referral of permits to the Historic Preservation Commission for those aspects of the change not approved by the application for development. So it's really two separate powers. And it's the interaction of those two powers that can sometimes be confusing and difficult.
Mayor, Commissioner speak. So just for clarity, again, the two powers, you're saying advisory and then the referral of permits.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the referral of permits is what has customarily been called the certificate of appropriateness. And that's for something not approved by the application for development. So you have an environmental commission. I believe you have an environmental commission. The language regarding the advisory power is exactly the same for the Historic Preservation Commission. It's purely advisory. If you don't send it to the commission, there's no negative impact. And the Planning and Zoning Board does not have to follow through with anything. So unfortunately, the legislature, when they adopted these provisions, didn't really understand that it's very common for planning and zoning boards to approve architectural plans. It's very common. We all know developers often sell their product by virtue of what they're showing you. They show you the building and it's a beautiful building. And technically, if that is approved by either the planning or zoning board, then the HPC has no jurisdiction because it was approved in the application for development. So I just look at preservation. And I am admittedly an advocate for preservation. I look at it as being part of the overall family. It should be part of the planning family in your community, not separate and apart. It's very simple for an application to come before the planning board, for example, provide its plans, And then say we're not, and the architectural plans are subject to review from the commission. So it's really, there's just an interplay of the two. So it binding on permits, advisory on applications for development. Binding on permits, subject to an appeal to the zoning board of adjustment, which is another source of potential conflict, confusion, and misunderstanding. You had, I think, a property, a tavern or something on Front Street that had a balcony or something, and it caused somewhat of a debate as to, who would govern that. But I think in that case, the commission denied the requested relief and it was appealed to the zoning board. That's what the statute allows. So that the municipality controls what happens within its boundaries. That's the way the statute is set up. So that was not clear in your ordinance. It was confused. So that was,
Clarify that again. What was not clear in the ordinance?
it was not clear that there is this distinction in functions, the advisory function and the function of the certificates of appropriateness or permits. So that needs to be cleared up. You have many properties that are designated. And this obviously reflects what I had perceived, and I appreciate your saying what you did, that I wouldn't think that the town was abandoning what was a really long history of historic preservation that you've had. And it's rather evident from you're not, the new urbanism of Pier Village, you're Red Bank. You have a lot of really valuable history here.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
We talk about the historic district. How much sway, or if you have a property on the historic registry, is that something that if you're doing work on it is also governed by the HPC? Or are you just talking about are you just focused on the properties that are in the historic district?
So the way that it works is if a district is designated, then everything within the district is regulated. Or you could have designation of sites,
So we'd have to name a specific property.
both.
Okay.
In your ordinance, you currently have both. So I think that you have a lot of properties that are designated. And you have the prior master plan, which just needs to be carried over to the new one. I think it was just a oversight. It had a very extensive discussion about preservation and why these properties were valuable, et cetera. So that was all there. What I thought was also missing and needed attention is what the design guidelines. So the land use law says that if you designate and regulate historic sites or districts, you must provide design guidelines and criteria. And in one of the versions of your ordinances, you actually said, we're going to adopt these, we're going to create them because they're done not by me, they're done by a design professional. And they really are a tremendous asset because if somebody comes into your town and buys a historic property because they want to preserve it, these guidelines become like a Bible for them. Right hand, it guides the commission, it guides the applicant, and it provides a tremendous resource. And it helps to everyone, or not everyone, but many criticize historic preservation as being very subjective. Not having, it's hard to understand what it is. The design guidelines shape that. You decide, you decide how you want to see these buildings retained, modified, expanded, et cetera. So that's something that you do not have. It was an ordinance that called for the adoption of design guidelines, and it was subsequently repealed. So you just have like general statements. Easy to misunderstand, in my opinion. You have some really beautiful buildings and resources in this town. And so that was one of the things I had recommended. And so, yes.
If I may ask a question, the design guidelines, when you see them in other towns, is it typically unique to the historic districts that you're speaking about, or is it a town-wide design pattern?
it depends upon the nature of the historic resources, so they are modified from town to town. So for over 30 years, I represented the city of Plainfield, and they had like 8 historic districts, and they had all different characteristics. Some of the buildings were pretty uniquely all Victorian. You appear to have a very eclectic mix, of a lot of different kinds of buildings. And a good preservation consultant writes the guidelines to provide the kind of guidance that is needed for districts like that. And we did have some of those in Plainfield where they were, you know, it was just, and you have that here. You could see when you look around that not all the buildings come from the same era. So they're written to be flexible, inherently flexible. In fact, I was a witness in a case many years ago where we sustained the validity of design guidelines on this idea that they need to be inherently flexible because real estate is unique. You know, they always say there's all little differences. So it just provides good guidance and opportunity to preserve what you have, change what you have. So that was part of what I really felt would be a really valuable asset to add to. So there's not misunderstandings. For developer, purpose of preservation is not to stop development. It is to maintain the historic character of your community and allow development to move forward at the same time. So that's the other thing. And then many years ago, I did the ordinance for the city of Cape May. And just like many communities, there was a lot of debate about preservation. I was really surprised. I thought in a town like Cape May, everybody's going to be 100% behind preservation, and they weren't. So in the midst of being hosted at lovely B&Bs, every time I went down there for a few days and met with groups and tried to come up with something that would be palatable to everybody, I developed what I call the 3-tier system. And I really like it because what it does is, number one, it takes anything that is specifically designed as ordinary maintenance and repair. You have a house, you have clapboard siding, you have some rotted siding. What does the Secretary of the Interior, which is the national organization, government organization for historic preservation, says what you want to encourage: ordinary maintenance and repair, ongoing maintenance and repair, replacement of deteriorated and rotted pieces with the same kind of product. So why should someone who has a piece of rotted siding and wants to replace it with a same kind of siding have to go before the commission for approval? It seems that you were punishing instead of rewarding them for what they were doing. So that's the first level, and it merely requires somebody to go to someone like Shauna or somebody in town, say, here's what I want to do. Here's the siding I have. Here's the siding I propose. And they could get an approval without going to the commission. The land use law, we got it amended in 91 to allow a minor application. That's a whole nother category. You have a minor application provision in one of your ordinances, but it's kind of, it's not worded very well. We wanted to try to tighten that up. And that would then allow the chairman to approve something like a sign, okay, or a fence, or something that doesn't have a tremendous impact on the building itself without going to the full commission. And then everything after that goes to the full commission. That would have that. So if you were going to put an addition on, or you were going to change something, that would be a full application for a certificate of appropriateness. And that the tricky part for those aspects of the change not approved by the application for development. And the very simple fix there, and it's worked in towns, and because towns that want to protect their resources want all of their agencies to work together. That's what should happen. So the planning board says we approve this, but the architecture is subject to review by the commission. So the actual placement of the building, the actual approval of the addition, that does not affect, that they can't act on that. They're only advisory on the zoning part. Advise, but they can review and provide permits for the architectural part of those buildings.
I thought Ben, you had your hand.
I did. So one of the concerns from some residents,
Thank you, Michelle, for being here. So one of the concerns I have from some of the residents in the district is that they have to apply for everything twice. I haven't fact checked this. So with this system, you know, if you wanted to put siding, you would just go to the office here. You know, if you want to replace approximately, fix the siding on your house, you would just go here and get an approval. You wouldn't have to apply to the planning board and the historic commission.
Unless there was an application for development. So, but one of the things that the law does do, and this is where, if you have a single family home. It's a single family home, you don't have a variance, you don't have a site plan because you're not allowed to have site plans for single family homes, and you don't have a subdivision because you're not dividing anything. So you just have a single family home and no variances. There's no application for development. So the only thing is the certificate of appropriateness, because there is no application for development at all. But it's not twice, it's only once. And if they replace, they do ordinary maintenance and repair, they put on siding that is, you know, and of course, this is where the design guidelines come in. Okay. Some communities will allow you to put siding that is the cedar impressions or some of these newer versions, you cannot tell they're not wood. I remember this very famous preservation consultant. She said they're making the siding so good that I have to do the knock test to tell if it's vinyl or wood. But that's where the design guidelines come in. That's where you control and dictate what it is that you would want to see in terms of things of that nature.
How do you feel about that particular example you just brought up?
I think it's very important that if there's a character defining trim, that should, and a lot of times back in the day, when they had aluminum siding, they'd come in and they'd knock all the trim off and that's what they would do. So as long as you maintain the trim and you have the same dimensional and it's that quality that is subject to the knock test, I think it's something that you define. I'm just an attorney. I don't make the design changes and the policy changes. You make the policy, and that's what you would do with a set of design guidelines. You would say, and I don't think you don't really have any buildings with slate roofs anymore. That's a big issue in some towns. They're very, very expensive. And there really is no copycat slate roof that looks like an old one.
I have one. It's made from recyclable, and people actually ask me if it's slate. It's a recyclable product.
So you see, that's the kind of thing as long as you're.
Not in the historic district, by the way.
I just like that kind of.
It's not a historic. So those are the things that you decide as a policy in your design guidelines, and as a council, you adopt, you're a council, right? Council form of government. As a council, you are the ones that would adopt the design guidelines. They're part of the ordinance. I really like the 3-tier because it gives people the ability to do the right thing and not have to get dragged through a bureaucratic process. So that, to me, is a very important component of the ordinance that you don't currently have. The minor application, you define, the statute does not tell you what a minor application is. It tells you can create one. You define it according to what you think is the best thing you'd like to do. And then the big category, and really the gorilla in the room that we haven't addressed is demolition. That is the hardest part of any historic ordinance. So your current ordinance simply says it's discouraged. There's no teeth to it.
Yeah.
So after World War II, many wealthy ladies in Savannah, Georgia, saw their resources being demolished, and they convince the town to put an ordinance into place that would require a property owner to offer the property to somebody for sale that would preserve it as a historic property. And the difference between what happened to the Savannah biddies and in New Jersey is that they dug in their pockets. They had deep pockets, they had money, and they acquired many of these properties. They fixed them up and they sold them back. And that's why Savannah is, in many respects, what it is today. But it is the hardest part. The best you could do, if you really want to control it, is a cooling off period. We did it in Cape May. We did it in Ocean City years ago. And it didn't stop in Cape May. It's like, I think you would be not a very popular member of the community if you demolished one of the houses. But so it's just been, there's been a real respect for the old buildings there. Ocean City, they had 600 demolitions a year in their historic property. They cut them in half. And then you can integrate it with some planning things, but I never got involved in that. It was just, I did have some conversations with Shauna, and she had this dream of being able to coordinate your underlying zoning with your historic designations so that you're not, you know, if you don't do that, then, you know, you have like you're downtown, you don't have really high-rise buildings, but if you did allow them, then historic preservation is putting icing on a cake that's too big for its context. So that's a whole nother issue that we never even got to with the ordinance.
I have one other question. We'll probably have a bunch of other questions. You know, we talked about houses that are outside the historic preservation district, but are on the historic registry. And forgive me if this is obvious, but what about the houses that are within the historic district that are not of historic significance? Are they, you know, how are those things governed?
No forgiveness is necessary because it's one of the most troublesome aspects. So most design professionals will tell you, historic preservation professionals, that you need to regulate those buildings that are what we would call non-contributing. So buildings get characterized by the federal law as being contributing to the integrity of the district or not contributing, or some of them are, you know, key outstanding buildings. So when you have buildings that were like, somebody came and built a 1950 ranch in the middle of the Washington Street Historic District, let's say, what do you do with that? And there's really a considerable debate amongst preservation design professionals as to what to do. I think the majority approach, and I really, I don't know if any of you know Gail Hunton. She's worked for the Monmouth County Parks Commission for years. She's in charge of their historic resources, and she's one of the most knowledgeable historic preservation consultants that I've ever met. She said what you have to be careful of, you can't deregulate them entirely. You kind of need a separate set of considerations because they kind of like, maybe they're not harmful to the district. They just don't have these historic characteristics. You want them to be able to just go unregulated and perhaps be redone so that they really are harmful. So you put in regulations for the non-contributing properties that doesn't really, it's more of, you're not trying to make them, restore them and bring them up into the character of the district, because most preservation consultants will tell you that's not good either. So it's not, it's a very troublesome problem. The other side of it is, if you don't regulate them, they call it a Swiss cheese district. So you have the district, you have these little holes in the district, and they're not regulated, and then what happens? That is also aligned with another problem, which the design guidelines can address these, and there's some really good consultants out there that can that address these in a way that helps to create harmony instead of disharmony. And the other one is, what do you do with new construction? So
New construction.
new
Yeah,
construction.
because there was
A plan that came up. And someone was proposing a new building on the west side of town that just It just didn't match anything for miles around. So
Yeah, actually, Mayor, that was actually what was just on my mind as well. When we're talking about what constitutes historic or historic district, I really do believe in preserving the historic district in town. But I'm a resident of the west side of Red Bank, and so much of our history is based over there, from the Galleria to the presidents who visited our town in the train station area. There's a rich history. My house is only 108 years old. But so are most of the houses in that area, including many single family homes along Shrewsbury Avenue, as well as some of the gorgeous buildings that are still on Shrewsbury Avenue that have original stained glass, brick, edge, trim, the whole nine. I think it was a really big wake up call when we just saw plans approved for the house that the mayor is referring to, that does not fit in with Shrewsbury Avenue and is now going to be happening. It's kind of like you have a set of Legos and suddenly this spaceship lands on the street. I guess what I'm getting at is what makes historic or not historic. I mean, almost every house that's along there is over 100 years old. There's houses that have been treated as historic that aren't much older than that. How do we preserve or not preserve or make sure that we're taking mind to the rest of the town as well outside of that district and the characteristics of those places?
So there are people who come and study areas and they do a survey and they go through each property and they go through the age of it, the integrity of the property. Does it still have its historic trim? Sometimes, you'll have a beautiful old house and they'll like build this storefront in front of them, something of that nature.
Out of those.
So they go through and they analyze it and they will generally try to kind of delineate a boundary of a district, because it's so much easier to deal with districts than it is individual properties. So they do that. And, there's, 50 years is the National Register age. I mean, if 50 years is about the minimum age that they want to be designated as historic. I know the area that you're talking about. There's some really charming homes. This is where, and this is beyond the historic preservation ordinance, but it's a really important component. So this is the thing that Shauna and I had spoken about several times. So you want to there's simple things like the setbacks, the height, prevailing layout, the streetscape. Those kinds of things are important to define in the zoning. And then you complement them with the design guidelines that you can adopt in terms of the type of development. As I said with, the new construction, there are two schools of thought amongst the design professionals. The prevailing school of thought is that you do not force anybody to try to build a house that looks like it was built 100 years ago. But you would want it to have the bulk, the size, the massing, the setbacks, and those kinds of features so that it fits in. It's not an old house, but it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. Those are all, that's why I guess we could have, I just felt I didn't want to get involved with an ordinance that didn't have really meaningful design guidelines. Because I just have seen how important they are to the ability of the commission to operate. And it's only fair to the regulated community. How would you feel if you said you have a zoning ordinance, but it doesn't tell you how much you're supposed to set back your property?
So it sounds like it's not so much an issue of empowered versus advisory. It's more of just well-defined guidelines and that kind of,
Well, it's advisory. It's advisory to development applications, binding on permits. And if you then create the one area, there's a potential conflict. The legislature assumes that planning and zoning boards didn't approve architectural plans. I don't know if any of you ever sat on one of those kind of boards, but they approve them all the time. Yes. Right? It's just part of it. And the land use law doesn't really incorporate that, but that's what happens. And all they have to do is say, okay, commission has given its advisory opinion. Sometimes the advisory opinion is, we think it'd be a good idea to grant this variance because this setback variance sets this house back the same distance as the prevailing pattern of historic development. You know, it's just as bad sometimes to have an old house, a new house that's set back really far from the streetscape where everybody else, like on Shrewsbury, has that line. So those are the kinds of things where you're gonna, if you really want to do it right, you would take your zoning, take your, you know, what you want to designate and make them work together and more compatible. And then, of course, it's advisory on anything that comes before the board. And then all the boards have to do is say, we approve these plans, but let the commission take a look as well, subject to their review.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the historic commission play a role in signage, like on Broad Street and approving signs? Commercial signs like on a restaurant or something like that? And is that again another guideline thing that's in the guidelines, or explain that to me?
All right, so I, for one, am a fan of signs being a minor application. Because it's not a big thing. They may get moved again. But they also need to have the design guidelines. So a minor application, I have defined a minor application as one in which the proposed change is consistent with the design guidelines. And most good design guidelines have very, very good signage requirements.
Now, in the historic district, I think Rembrandt doesn't include the downtown per se, doesn't it, or does it? I mean, and does that mean it still has a say on the signs?
There is a downtown district. There is a downtown district.
We have signage guidelines for downtown that are completely defined. You can't put neon in downtown, for instance. There's colors, there's actually qualities, and it does get reviewed by a subcommittee of the planning.
But it's not, the historic commission doesn't play a role in that, does
No,
it?
it does. I believe it's actually called the design district, if I'm not mistaken, but it is the downtown.
Yeah, it's regulated, but I don't think there's any real guidance as to what kind of signs you have.
So it's,
Broad guidance.
yeah,
So let me see.
time that I've been paying attention. I remember that there was approval of the signs on the Count Basie Theater when they asked to put Hackensack Meridian on the theater. That was with historic preservation and approved. I know that there were people that applied for different signs on Monmouth Street and said they were going to be black lettering, and they said, what shade of black? So I do think this is something that needs to be defined and made clearer to make it easier for businesses. And I think, you know, one thing I've taken away from you already is clear design guidelines. That seems to be something that's been missing and would bring a lot of clarity to everybody who's been trying to conform with signage.
In Plainfield, we had Gail Hunton was the preservation consultant for many years, even though she still worked for the county, but she did side work. And she wrote a set of guidelines, and they were like given all kind of awards. But developers, homeowners, people would come in and they would say, thank you. You just gave us an asset. You gave us something that was worth it. We could understand what to do. You gave us standards and we could follow them. It was very successful. But you have the central business zone historic district. And it has it's on the zoning map, it delineates it, but it consists of approximately 80 buildings, as it says. Majority of which were constructed prior to 18. I need the other questions for that. 1890. So, and then you have the Washington Street Historic District, and then all the properties are listed. There's a lot of properties on Wallace Street, on Washington Street, Spring Street. So over the years, your town has done a tremendous amount of work for historic preservation.
Just like on the inventory.
So, you have a lot of components of it, but there were so many different pieces. And I think the fundamental important pieces were not there. That's how I saw it.
Now, did you write up? Yeah, I think you,
Yes, I wrote several versions. I think the first was retained, it would have been in August of 22. And I think it was around November or December, I prepared a very rough draft of an ordinance, but I kept saying we need design guidelines, and we went through it we distributed it. People commented, put their comments in, or we discussed what they were. And then I guess it just kind of stalled at a certain point. It didn't, and then you had a new government coming into place. So in my opinion, the only thing that made sense was to do it the right way. Take it and integrate it into your planning concept, because your town, I mean, I've loved this town since for a long time, I've loved this town, and it's a beautiful, I would come here any day over going to Pier Village, because this is real.
Never go to Pier Village.
Pier Village tries to copy the nouveau urbanism and stuff like that, but this is the real thing.
Yeah, so Ms. Donato, just a couple quick questions. So there were design guidelines that were being drafted for the ordinance that you're working on.
No, they never did. We tried to get authorization to do so.
Your recommendation is that no ordinance should be passed until design guidelines are drafted as part of any ordinance.
That's correct.
That a proper professional who has a background in historic design should be retained to help draft those. It shouldn't be left strictly to the current HPC.
The HPC cannot draft them. They need a design profession.
I'm just trying to be clear. Yeah, now you brought up earlier about the non-contributing buildings, which I love that term, by the way. And I'm
It's not mine. It's
it gives me something to work with as opposed to,
Yes.
nowadays, in some ways, it's a nice one. It's not. We have this really nice historic inventory here in town. However, it hasn't always been respected. Many buildings on the west side are on it, are on that historic inventory. And there should be a way in any ordinance that the inventory in some ways is actually, look, some buildings fall into disrepair to a point that there is no way to preserve them. They are a tear down at a certain point that happens in town. And some people buy those buildings and then they let them by neglect get to that point, which is also horrible. There's not easy solutions to these issues, but the inventory should be in some ways respected more than it has been. But you bring up these non-contributing properties. We have a historic district. And is there a currently though, right now, non-contributing and those that are considered on the historic inventory are treated the same as far as the process by which they have to go through the permitting process in town?
There was a one little clause, as I recall, which said something about that. There was a clause about contemporary design is not encouraged, but shall be permitted. There's that piece. And then there was something that I recall, but I kept getting tangled in the many changes to the ordinance and what was still there and what wasn't still there. So I had made a recommendation that we just start with a whole new ordinance. So I would say the following, that non-contributing buildings, which is the term of the National Register, okay, should be reviewed in kind of like the same manner this language is here for the contemporary buildings, where it says, that any changes should be compatible in character, scale, setback, style, color, and materials. You want to also make sure that you don't get the wrong kind of setbacks. It's a really important piece of the setbacks.
Right.
Because, that's the streetscape. So
That's if you're talking about, right, a tear down and a rebuild too.
No, but yes, that's correct. That's where you have to look at your zoning.
so
So, yes, but
and I don't pin this on you. It just, it's just, as we're talking, it still seems like a conflict to me. On the one hand, you're saying we want to be off, let's say, a non-conforming structure, we want to be authorizing it so it's consistent with design elements, like whether that's siding or shutters or whatever it is. But you also said that a lot of professionals say we don't want to try and build a home that looks like it's a 100-year-old home or something.
agree.
So I'm just trying to find, I guess we'd have to hire somebody and see what they come up with.
That's-
design elements,
That's what I've,
right? See if it's.
Exactly.
'Cause I'm-
that's exactly what I have recommended. I continue to recommend because there's that when I was pointing out that language with the contemporary, that was just to show you that there is a way that you can deal with it, that you treat them differently than you would the historic resources. But on the other hand, you don't want them to be worse, you know. And the other thing, of course, is color. And there's, I'm of the belief that color can be far too controversial. And, I think that, it's reversible too. So it's not like it's permanent forever, so I don't believe in regulating color, but that's me personally, because I've seen terrible things happen, with people being angry that they had to regulate color. And as you said, what shade of black?
Yeah.
So but that's all where if you have a really good preservation consultant, you can eliminate a lot of these kinds of problems. How do you deal with the non-contributing properties so they don't get worse? They don't get worse. And then how do you deal with new construction? And those kind of, and like Shrewsbury Avenue, that's a very good example of where the zoning needs to be in place first. So Greg and I share representation of a little town out in the western part of the county. And I was there for several years, and they put together, after many years, we got a historic preservation ordinance in. And I said, you really should change the zoning, because the houses are all close to the street. And the setback requirement in the ordinance was like 25 feet. And it just didn't fit. So we made it actually easier and better for the historic properties by changing to have the prevailing setback.
You raised an excellent point with that. There's houses in my area that have different setbacks, and it really, you feel it. And then on the opposite hand, where there has been newer build near my house, where there were lots that were subdivided and things, and the original house happened to be very set back because it was near the river on the west side. When they subdivided, they let houses go into the front of that lot. They kept an appropriate setback, and although those houses are new build, they don't stick out like sore thumbs. And I think they're a really good example. The two houses on your street on Locust that are two new builds, I think are a good example of having a proper setback. They fit in with the neighborhood, but they so yeah, I guess those were my main focuses coming into the conversation, is how you preserve that. I'm very focused on that other district, but I feel an urgency with the west side.
So I have a feeling there might be some work already done on that someplace. I think I might have seen something.
Hi, Michelle, good to see you. I have a question regarding the look. As you said, it has to pass a touch test. So if someone who wanted to replace a porch, for example, and they get manufactured wood as opposed to the actual wood, is that something be accessible? And then going into my other question, and I think you and I had talked about this before, that which is visible from the street. So that does not mean looking into the window of someone's home to see whether or not they have chandeliers or not. It's about just what you see from the outside.
I think that there is seriously questionable constitutionality of regulating the interior of someone's private home. I think that the only time I've seen the regulation of the interior are for landmark structures like a theater, an opera house, or something like that. It usually is the outside. And there's a debatable, in some towns, they like to see the back of the house, all sides of the house, not just the front facing on the street, which makes some sense. But it should not regulate inside. And again, the type of material, that's design guidelines.
Right.
They have become so proficient in some of these substitute materials. So long as you don't destroy the trim and some of the, the design features, but you can get it in an altered, I mean, it's amazing what they do now.
Right, PVC railings for porches. Yes, Ben.
So I'm interested in what happens if somebody just doesn't comply. Let's say we have a historic house and they just decide to wrong material on them. What happens?
You mean they do it without getting approval? So it's just like if they violated any other ordinance, a zoning ordinance, built something without getting they violate the construction permit, they don't get a permit that they need. It's the same thing, they're in violation. But as I often say, code enforcement, it all falls apart on enforcement. And it certainly does or all land use. You can have the strongest land use in the world, the best conditions of approval, you don't enforce it. And your comment about the failure to maintain, they actually call it demolition by neglect. It's what it's called. So if you have a property maintenance code, that property maintenance code should be able to prevent somebody from allowing something to deteriorate like that. Again, that's an enforcement issue, and you just have to have, if you don't enforce, you might as well not have a law. And that's across the board with everything.
With the historic district and, one of the things that the planning board has always concerned with when this first came up to us was, how do you find that fine line between modern, in particular, like solar panels, ecological design, and marrying that? And what is your experience in trying to find the compromise between not blocking ecologically prudent design with your design standards that you put into a district like that?
It is something that communities have grappled with, some successfully and some not. I don't think that we could expect that in any size, shape, or form, preservation is static and creates a non-changing asset. That it just doesn't work in this world. Things change.
Because I'll be candid, when I voted no when we elevated it out of the planning board. And my reason was specifically because the testimony said at that time, and I have respected the preservation, the historic inventory as best that I could when I was at planning board, et cetera. My main question was, would you be blocking modern building materials such as solar panels? And the answer was a plain yes to me at that time. And I was deeply concerned because the reason that buildings that are 200 years old still exist today is because those people who repaired them and maintained them actually started bringing in modern standards of maintenance. And we can't go backwards and expect us to kind of stick to something, but that was then. That's why these buildings are actually still here, is because they were constantly updated. But that is actually quite literally the reason why. And it was like that marriage, and it was going to block that from that. It was, the point was that I was told a very blunt no, that we would block those from that particular district at that time. But I'm all for a historic district, and I'm all for the preservation. I'm also just wanting to make those carve outs so that we're not, those non-contributing properties aren't stuck, but actually do kind of maintain that. I know there are some issues in particular with landscaping in that district. There's been some landscaping issues in particular. I walk through there daily, so I see it daily. And at the same time, I see also some of these properties maintaining them to a standard that is really, that's one size fits all. This doesn't make any sense. So.
And I think if the National Register and some of the guidance that they put out would essentially recognize the need to adapt, modify, et cetera. So, but that when an ordinance is adopted, those issues are addressed in the design guidelines. And I don't want to keep going back to them, but that really is where
You're
these.
saying we need design guidelines? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think that's what I said.
Yeah.
I have a question, but I'm going to sort of use a summary in order to get there. I like that helps me learn, and maybe it will benefit someone. But just from all that we've talked about, because this is a pretty complex discussion. Starting at the top, the historic preservation has sort of two components, technically, the advisory and then a binding portion. And it sounded like from what you said, that is also what might separate a commission from a historic preservation committee, which would only have advisory powers versus, whereas commissions would have binding in regards to permits or certificates of appropriateness. Is that correct?
So the land use law does not have a committee. Says you can have a historic preservation commission with those two hybrid functions, advisory on applications for development, binding on permits. There's no committee option. There is an option for what is called a strong or a weak commission on the permit review function. So in some communities, the commission gets the permit, there's no application for development. They can't really make the decision. They would say, we recommend X, and then it goes to the planning board, and the planning board says, we agree or we disagree. That's a weak commission is the one where the planning board must, but it's still called a committee, but otherwise you're correct about the two different functions.
Got it. So those towns that do have a committee is something kind of different, or it's not really a land?
I suppose if it was a committee, if they called it a committee, but it was established consistently with the land use law, then it would be legal. It's just semantics in a sense.
Okay, got it. Just a nomenclature. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then then within that, the scope of the properties that are regulated could be through historic districts, which we have, as well as individual designated sites, which we also have, correct? And then as recommended, design guidelines would be optional but ideal to define the criteria for I assume both the advisory and the binding elements. Mission.
That would be on both, yes, but the statute says that you must have design criteria if you create the commission. If you designate regulated historic sites, you have to have them. What they say, if they're just very broad or if they're more specific, that's really optional. I have found over the years that the more specific guidelines are really better for the whole community. So you don't have to say what color black.
Mhm.
You get to define that. That's why I like it. It's the control is because commissions are always criticized as being too subjective. And it's really hard to eliminate subjectivity unless you have a straight number. Preservation is in its nature a different situation. But to the extent that you can provide that guidance, you're helping everybody. You're helping the homeowners, you're helping the developers, and you're helping the integrity of your community.
Makes perfect sense. And I think we're all sensitive to the aesthetic part of this too.
Yep.
So that does ring true. I think the trickier part is when we're talking about the scope of the oversight for the permits, the certificates of appropriateness, and when it comes to binding decisions. And it sounds like, if I can also summarize your recommendation, though it could theoretically be written in a multitude of ways, your recommendation is that 3-tier system with escalating requirements for review, as simple as just zoning or building reviews up to the entire HPC sits at this dais to review. And that's, I guess, where my question was. The lowest tier was that ordinary maintenance and repair, which we want to encourage, of course. But I recall in earlier discussions that we had that some of the scope of that, what fell under that were things that, at least in our town, other homeowners outside of the historic district or those designated sites would not necessarily have to even come for a permit for. So that was just my concern.
I think I know what you're aiming at. So under the Uniform Construction Code, that uses a term, ordinary repair. So you can, and now it's actually been broadened, you could replace the siding on your house without having a construction permit. You can replace the windows provided they're in the same hole as the previous window. No construction permit. So that's why you can't link preservation to a construction permit, because it allows you to take all the trim off of a house. That's what is a character defining feature.
Right.
I think that's what you're aiming at. I think that you're, so, but this definition of ordinary maintenance and repair is the historic definition. And basically, if you replace and you look at it, and again, this is where you would make the decision. I think it's a good idea to let people have, and you would say, it's a good idea to let people replace the siding with the siding of the same size dimension, but it doesn't have to be wood. So that's, but you're correct.
Yeah, I just wanted to,
Yes.
guys, it sounds like you would have like a list of repairs for an ordinary homeowner that would require some review by our building department. And then there might be a larger list of repairs or maintenance that historic properties would be subject to.
Yes, yes. But homes that are not regulated as a site or a district, they're not designated, they're not subject to that at all. So Shrewsbury Avenue would be able to take off all the character defining trim. You have some really charming buildings down there too. You really do. So they just be for the designated sites and districts.
Thank you.
What about
Non-conforming,
or the non-contributing buildings that are located within the historic district? Would they be subject to similar guidelines just for their style of house? And do they regulate things such as fences and
That's,
other types of exterior things?
that's what ordinarily is done. They don't have the same level of review that would take place with a historic property, but it's kind of like, you know, and it's really difficult because you don't really know. See, some buildings that are not part of the integrity of the historic district, they're actually harmful. They call them intrusive, I think. You know, there's sometimes that could be where somebody came and took down a beautiful little house and put up a big ugly square. You know, what do you want to do? Do you want to keep that there? If they come and they want to get it, they want to wreck it. So you have to be a little bit inventive with some of that. And so that's where the design guidelines, you would probably, and I don't know, do you have a lot of that? Like if you were to go to these designated districts, you have a lot of properties that are not, you know, they don't have any contributing feature to them.
It's a considerable mix. There's, you know, but there's a reason why it's designated, and there's also, but it's a considerable mix. I don't know if there's anything that would qualify as a nuisance property like you're describing right there. In particular, like that real sore thumb that really sticks out. We don't have any pyramids in the middle, pyramid houses in the middle of our neighborhoods.
I think the National Register has some guidance on this, and because you're not the only one that has the problem. And I guess the idea is if it's there and it's kind of like grown into the landscape, you just don't want it to do something really incongruous. And on the other hand, if it is incongruous, you might want to make them grow out of the landscape. So, you know, you kind of have to be, I think, very flexible with the non-contributing properties, in my opinion. They're the bugaboos that you find in this whole process is that the non-contributing demolition, which is challenging, and the ability of the land use agencies, planning and zoning board, to recognize that the architectural detail should be sent back over to the commission for their review.
Commissioner Speak.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to how we wound up here before we get completely towards the end, because there was a reason why we all put the brakes on this when we got a new form of government, and why specifically it was the Historic Preservation Commission that we took the brakes on this with. You were referring to earlier about the Environmental Commission
Yes.
and what they're empowered to do. And I was the chair of that formerly, as was Nancy. And, you know, so we have experience with that. We would get plans in front of us and we would send suggestions that, you know, whether or not they were taken into account. Was there anything with the existing Historic Preservation Commission that empowered them more than the Environmental Commission?
No, the statutory language is identical.
Okay, so that was my main issue, was that that's not how it was acting. It was acting like it had much more power than the Environmental Commission. So I think that is really important to clarify why we're here right now, why the brakes were put on this, and why we want to make sure that this commission, once it's formed again, possibly with a new ordinance, with design guidelines that never existed, And all of these extremely important moving pieces, this three-tier system that you're describing, sounds wonderful. But I just really wanted to inform residents and everybody why this happened the way it did, why we had to put the brakes on this, why it's being treated so seriously. So there was nothing that was empowering it further than an advisory board. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
The time you gave us a wonderful
Yes.
presentation.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Michelle.
Thank you. Well, I confess that I'm an advocate of preservation, so it colors my approach.
That's a good thing.
I'll reach out to you during the week. I can maybe get Gail's number from you. Maybe she'll come and give us.
I don't know if we can get her out of retirement. She's almost retiring.
All right, well, I'll ask you. for-
Fine, well, there's some good people.
Oh, yeah.
Who did Allen?
Had somebody that she was going to recommend.
Remember who did Allentown's design standards?
We,
They're working great.
they actually, Jan, it was done in-house with Allison and Jan.
Yes,
And they went and Gail Hunton gave them a bunch of free things.
Gail Hampton's name. Gail Hunting, ears must be ringing at the end of this.
Oh, Gail,
Gail Hunting, yeah, ears must be ringing.
Is good.
really, she has, I think, the broadest and most reasonable balanced perspective. That's what you need. That's what you need in government in general, but especially with this topic. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
This was
Thank you.
really wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
Questions, please don't hesitate, okay? I hate to think that I did all that work and it won't go anywhere.
No, you, even just I think the language you've given us tonight to be able to have this discussion is really important.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle.
Now I have a motion to, we're just gonna open up the floor. I have a motion to open up the floor for comments on the agenda items only.
Make a motion.
I have a second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right. If anyone has any comments? Please, the microphone is yours. Yes, Jimmy. Oh, you got me coffee. Thank you.
Go ahead. I believe in sharing. Jimmy Dark, 48 West Sunset Avenue. My comment is about the recycle place down the street. And I feel one thing, I only had to use the paper, but one thing.
Hang on one second. We got to do agenda items only and then open comments are at the end.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Oh, you confused me for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't know what I missed.
When you said you coming up, I said, let me go ahead now.
All right. Anyone else have, yes? Yeah.
Suzanne Viscomi, 25 Cedar Street. My question is on Saint, the street that you're changing the parking on, I can't see it right now.
St. Mary's Place.
I don't have the right glasses on. What was the rationale for that? And what's the issue on that street?
So this, if you're familiar with the street, it's a very narrow dead end street. I'm sorry, Mayor Peninsulas. I didn't mean to jump on you. I just, it's a very narrow street. It's probably about 16 or 17 feet wide. And currently there's parking on both sides and it's worked okay for a long time, but it seems like the parking is becoming a little heavier on that street. And the reality is now if somebody did in fact park on both sides, you couldn't get down the street. So we have to limit it in some way. So we're going to put it to just one side of the street. So that would still leave enough room for a vehicle or especially an emergency vehicle to get down.
Wait, I'm just out of curiosity because a car on Cedar Street lost her mirror last week because there was a big truck on the street and kind of the same situation. It's not a dead end, but it dives into Cedar Crossing. And talking to some residents there, they're really tired of people going down Cedar Street in the Cedar Crossing and doing a multi-K tunnel to get back around again. Because they don't, not all the people don't realize you can go around the whole circle. They just think it's a dead end. So I'm just curious of the rationale. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm Donald Ellis at 23 Highland Avenue in Red Bank. I actually don't have a comment, but more of an expression of gratitude and thank you to this board for your willingness to consider the Highland Avenue parking solutions. You guys have been very gracious and open-minded with things, and I truly appreciate you giving that some consideration. And as members of the board, you put in a lot of your personal time here for the residents. And as a resident of Red Bank, I certainly want to let you know how much I personally appreciate the time and the dedication you do to help this town become better and to manage it very well. So it's really just a big thank you to all of you and to the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll give the same compliment back to you. I thought you were always looking for a solution here, not just looking for a problem, and from where I sit, that is much appreciated. And by the way, we're gonna be voting on something that was not on the original agenda that we put out. I had told Don that it was gonna be on and I had forgotten, so in a perfect world, we always have the agenda put out 2 days before, but I'd rather, in this case, I wanted to keep my word to you. It was a great communication back and forth, so thank you as well.
Yeah, big thank you to all of you and thank you for your dedication.
Get someone online there? I do, yeah. Dan Reardon, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So two things I wanted to comment on. The first I hope I'm allowed to comment on is about the Historic Preservation Commission. I really appreciate the presentation that you guys arranged for us. And I hope that you will strengthen the HPC. The one thing that I have not seen in I've looked at some of the ordinances that Ms. Donato was talking about, and I didn't see any standards for how buildings get on or off the registry. So if a homeowner thinks their home is historic, what are the criteria? Or if a homeowner thinks their home is not historic, what are the criteria for getting off the registry? What is the procedure? Is there any way to move your home on or off? The other thing that is not in the ordinances that I saw that I think is really important is informing homeowners. I think there are, 100, 200 properties listed in the appendix of the master plan. I don't think that home buyers are going to check the appendix of the master plan before they move in. And if they're going to then find out that they can't change the wood trim on their house, you're going to have a lot of frustrated home buyers. So there should be some way in the home purchasing process to inform homeowners you're about to buy a much more regulated piece of property. So those are my comments on the historic preservation. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the Diane Joy settlement that you guys are considering this evening. I just wanted to point out that the current right-of-way on the tax map is 12 feet wide. The old opening, which happened to be there, was 24 feet wide. You're about to give them 30 feet and in some places 40 feet of width. You're about to create a new easement that will give them the right to use that much of the parking lot for their deliveries. So you're going to give them a piece that's about 30 feet wide and 50 feet long for their use of borough property. The other thing is, it looks to me, based on the attachment, as if it might also be giving them the right to park a semi in the southern traffic lane at White Street. So to block that lane and to pin 16 cars on either side with their semi while they're loading and unloading. I would much rather see a solution where they use the other right of way, because there's a right of way perpendicular to the one that was in the part of the suit. There's another 12-foot right of way that's perpendicular. I'd rather see them use that for unloading, for loading and unloading. And I just can't buy that the only way to deliver a stove is with a semi. A 20-foot box truck can carry anything that that store sells. It's not as convenient as a box truck for them, but I don't think that we need to give away 1,500 square feet of borough property for their convenience. So I'd just like you to reconsider this settlement that you're about to get into. So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so I'll address Mr. Reardon's question about the lawsuit. So as you saw, that lawsuit was filed right at the end of my last tenure here as borough attorney. It followed a lot of negotiations. Project was laid down in 2020. Thereafter, the business, it's not just the settlement is with one property owner, but the easement is a T shape from the back of multiple properties. They happen to be the ones that sued, but really there's five other properties that also have the right to come out of the back of their business and traverse a 12-foot wide strip across the White Street lot back to White Street. Mr. Reardon's points are well taken, that when we were negotiating this matter prior to litigation, there were multiple, and then I was doing the negotiations, we had multiple different options for bringing is it Drummond Avenue that also comes into law?
Drummond Place.
So Drummond Place, we had some options to bring trucks around from Drummond Place. We had options to bring different size trucks. There was a lot of different proposals that went back and forth. I can't speak to what happened after I left last summer. But I do know that there were very practical issues with the proposals that were given when I was negotiating it. So for example, a lot of their deliveries could not be guaranteed in the size of truck. Two, make no mistake, they have a recorded piece of paper that they're entitled to a T-shaped easement across the back of those properties. So it's not just as easy as maybe taking away part of the T, which is what we were trying to do by bringing trucks in off Drummond Place. The solutions that involved bringing trucks from Drummond Place and essentially turning them in and then backing them to the back of those businesses was that we were losing about 11 parking spaces anyway. So the difference between trying to make either one, sticking to the legal rights of the 12-foot wide does not support the turning of any kind of truck off of White Street, as you can imagine. Two, we were going to lose parking spaces by creating potentially bigger traffic problems on Drummond Place by trying to back the trucks in there. Three, there's only one business right now that it's vital to, but there's no guarantee that in the future, one of the other 6 property owners doesn't have the exact same issue. And settling a lawsuit with all those property owners that makes their property potentially less valuable was then also significant. The other potential plaintiffs were a significant factor. So the legal rights were one thing, the practicalities were another, the future risks were another. And like I said, I can't speak for what happened when Mr. Antonelli picked it up, but the solution that was landed on is the safest way to bring trucks to the back of those stores in accordance with their easement. So the path will be wider. The reason it will be wider is for essentially public safety. It's not to give this one business owner something that they don't deserve. The easement that was written in the early 1900s is also very arguable. It talks about things like carts and horses. And what a judge would do to redline that, I suspect was a major concern of mine, and I'm sure was a major concern of Mr. Antonelli's as the lawsuit progressed. And so what I can say to Mr. Reardon is that having studied this issue in depth for a couple of years and then handing it over to Mr. Antonelli, there was no real solution that stuck specifically to the property rights. No matter what solution was enacted, multiple parking spaces were going to be lost. And at number 3, I don't know this for a fact, and I don't want to speak for him, but Mr. Antonelli's solution that was ultimately approved before this governing body got here is the safest way to restore the easement and have traffic safety at the same time and head off any problems with the other 5 easement holders. So it's not the greatest solution in the world. And certainly the curbing shouldn't have been laid across the easement to begin with. I think that's a fairly obvious point. But once it was, there was a number of years that went into studying this solution. And no, it does not particularly tailor exactly to the legal rights as presented by the claimant, but there were 5 other claimants, and it's, backing a tractor trailer down the middle of a 12-foot lane in the middle of a White Street lot, as you can imagine, and is a serious traffic safety issue. So I think that I'm sure that like I said, we're speaking for people who aren't here, but there's no way they didn't sit in a room and say, we can give up, we have to give up 5 extra parking spaces, and it's completely safe, and we know this is going to work, and we're not going to have truck jammed on Drummond Place, or we're crashing into people's cars in the White Street lot. I suspect that was the conversation, because that was the conversation that was happening here, when I was here before. The settlement agreement was agreed to before the court on the record on May 2nd. So the governing body doesn't really have a lot of options in terms, absent approval here tonight. I'm sure that the plaintiff will file a motion to enforce the settlement that was placed on the record that had the, affirmance of the then governing body. Mr. Reardon raised very astute critiques of the settlement, but those are the factors that went into it. And at this juncture, this governing body does not have much latitude to change them. And that's certainly not to be critical of the ultimate solution, which, as I looked at it for a couple of years, there was really no good solution to the problem. So that's where we landed. I hope that answers Mr. Reardon's question, and hope that answers everyone's kind of questions about the settlement tonight. It's pretty much the best lemonade we could make.
That's a good answer. Thanks.
All right. Anyone else have, yes?
Good evening, Alan Hill, 64 McLaren Street. First of all, I'd like to just thank Ms. Donato, if that's the correct term for a lawyer, I don't know, for her explanation today. And I sort of gather from what she said that actually this has been a process that's taken place over quite a few months, and with the Historic Preservation Society Commission, I beg your pardon. And it's a bit disappointing, because I was actually doing my homework this afternoon, and I looked back over the proceedings of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I did see a lot of agendas, but not one set of minutes that could actually verify what Ms. Donato says. I'm not disputing what she says, but I'm going to say on behalf of myself and a lot of other people, had we known subjects like this were on discussion, we would have been there and put our own point of view. I happen to come from a country where something like the majority of family houses are over 140 years old, where whole villages, towns, and even large sections of cities are under historical protection, and so on. And so I feel that some of us, and certainly other residents in the town, would have an input on that. And I think it's next time Ben is having a stroll, sorry, Mr. Forrest is having a stroll around the Historic Preservation District, there are a few people other than on his contact list he might like to chat to who have a viable point of view. Now, speaking of minutes, it was a great surprise, in fact, a pleasant surprise last time I came to this meeting, that minutes of the previous meeting were made available to the public. And it's a great disappointment that this time no minutes of the previous meeting are available. And I'd just like to know whether that is just fortunate the toner ran out, or whether it's a means of actually limiting a discussion on agenda items only. And
I think just real quick, we had both our Laura was away and Caitlin is away, and we were just a little understaffed at the clerk's office these last few weeks. So I'm sure we'll be back to I think when's Laura back?
Right after Labor Day.
Yeah, right after Labor Day, we should be back on track with minutes posted.
Okay, thank you. That's not the end though. In that case, I do feel justified in going over a couple of points from last week, last meeting. One, has there been any change in the timetable for Mr. McConnell's eventual retirement? And are there going to be any extra knock-on costs for the residents of this town?
What was the last? I missed the last part of that question.
Has there been any change in the timetable for Mr. McConnell's eventual retirement? Will there be any knock-on costs which come to the residents of this town? Simple question.
I'm having
Additional costs that come.
Knock-on costs.
Extension with.
New good.
It
I
is
think it's the
coming
phrase.
muffled for some reason.
Yeah, it was sounding odd.
Knock on.
Well, as far as the timetable goes, I guess I can let Darren address that. There's no additional cost in that regard. Either way, we'll be paying somebody to be serving in the role of temporary VA until we hire somebody full-time. The original plan was when Darren retires, Laura was going to step into that role until we had somebody else hired, and we'll have to negotiate a salary with her for that additional work as well.
Thank you. Second point was on that agenda was the police department clinician, which I see there's been some movement in that a job. Well, no, not a job really, a request for people to write in and say what they do for the money or whatever. The only sort of notice I've seen was in Tap Into, which also gave a point of contact of somebody who left this borough some time ago. But I'm disappointed that that has still gone through with no consideration as to a job description or looking at any other possible means of spending that money. And so that's all it is from me, is that is a disappointment, and I hope that gets somebody does something to resolve that. On this agenda, there are two matters that strike me, and one is amending and supplementing chapter whatever it is about graffiti. Now, these are, what's being proposed here is really retrogressive. It doesn't really look at the roots of the problem and doesn't examine actually why this happens or what we're going to do about that. In fact, all it basically does is just increases fines and stuff like that in a situation where we know we can't even enforce. We don't even know who's doing this stuff, and leaves also householders in the invidious position of if what amounts to criminal damage is made to their property, if they don't fix it too sweet, they end up with a summons from the borough as well. There are a lot of there are a lot of reasons why graffiti appears. There are a lot of reasons why vagrants go around the street begging. There are a lot of reasons that that the town should be dealing with and not just proposing more and more drastic resolutions. And the last point is really going with Mr. Reardon there, who raised the settlement agreement. There are going to be actual building costs, I assume, resulting from this. And these might be quite substantial, because I don't know if the parking lot is really capable of taking, I don't know how heavy a truck is, 20 tons, 40 tons, that might deliver this sort of thing. So I believe they'll be quite substantial. Do you have any idea how much it's going to cost to resolve this? And where is that money coming from? Thank you.
So the engineer's estimate is approximately, I believe, $52,000 for the construction work, and the money is already existing in a current parking bond that we have. Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. I'm Roseanne Dalpra from 212 River Road in Red Bank. And I'm a former member of the HBC. Just a couple comments. One, I just wanted you guys to know that Chris Fabricant, the former commissioner of the HBC, has asked for an RFP for a design consultant since October 2022. And he was just brushed off. Ms. Donato actually prepared language to include in an RFP, which she gave, I believe, to Mr. McConnell. So if you could refer to that, I think it's, as she made clear, it's very important to have these design guidelines in effect before an ordinance can be enacted. Another point, Mayor Portman, you mentioned that there was no talk that the HBC has been disbanded. But actually there was an email from Ms. Bonatakis to Chris Fabricant saying that essentially the HBC has been disbanded and you haven't made any new reappointments to the commission like the other committees. So my question is, have you decided who is going to be on the new HBC?
Yes, I guess technically you could say that it was disbanded because all of the commissions and committees were disbanded when we reset the government.
But you reappointed
Yes,
members?
yes, absolutely did. Now, I don't know at this point who is going to be on the,
Reappoint the same members for these other committees?
no,
Oh, okay,
no, there was a lot of, well, some, I can't say no, it wasn't across the board. There were some that remained and there were some that were replaced.
okay.
So I don't know who will be, I haven't focused on that. But I am excited to talk to Michelle, get some recommendations for a design person, maybe even have them come and I thought that presentation was incredibly informative. So maybe we'll have a design professional do the same thing as well.
So you haven't thought about who is going to be reappointed to the commission?
We have to redo the ordinance.
Yeah,
You need to make a decision soon?
We're waiting till.
Do the whole ordinance.
Waiting until today.
yeah.
You're waiting.
Step one would be to redo the ordinance so that you have the setup of the commission again. And then you would appoint all the people.
So right now, there are no members of the commission. You're gonna wait for a new ordinance to be drafted?
So it sounds like Michelle already drafted it, really.
Right. Well, we don't have the design element.
Well, you haven't enacted it.
Potential part. What's that?
I said you haven't enacted a new ordinance yet,
Correct.
right? Okay.
Permission to speak?
Yeah.
And just for clarity, again, I think I made this point earlier, but I just want to make it clear. The Historic Preservation Commission, as it stood with its existing ordinance, did not have any more power than the Environmental Commission.
Yeah, I heard you.
So it couldn't continue on as if it had more power than it did. Like, this really had to be put on pause, addressed properly, so that, you know, the decisions that are being made are empowered and proper process was being made.
Trying to do that with, you know, having design guidelines enacted.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And
She's saying we need a whole new ordinance, yeah.
Okay, so right now, what happens if there's an application, like say, to demolish an historic structure? It's not going to go before anyone for HPC, or what would happen?
For the planning. Huh? I mean, even now, but even as the HBC existed, did it have any?
It technically didn't have that power.
Recommend to the.
Right.
It could recommend,
Right.
but it didn't have the power to tell people they couldn't. And if it was acting as if it had that power, you were opening yourself up to litigation and could have been sued for acting outside of the limits of your actual power.
Okay, so there's no, not even, you're not even gonna have any kind of advisory guidance or anything on historic structures?
Again, I think as frustrating as the process may be, as Michelle said, we should probably do it right so we don't have an issue. So we should be including all.
Been trying to do since October 2022, just so you know.
Right, I understand.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I also just say, having served with you, Roseanne, and being there, I think one thing I would note is from even what Michelle said, a really important piece of this commission succeeding is its alignment with the rest of the borough planning board as well, I'm sure, as the governing body. And I don't think we had that. We were in a situation where the body itself, the commission itself, was working the process of defining its own scope, which I don't think is very natural or conducive to that kind of harmony with the borough. So I think that that's also why we agreed hey, maybe we need to look at this as a body to make sure that this can succeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question of Greg, building on this? You know, we still have a historic district. Are we obligated to have a body that helps to overlook plans within that historic district, or does that just automatically default by statute to the planning board?
I mean, we'll have to talk to Shauna about how to procedurally deal with it before you reappoint the commission, but the ordinances are still in place. So the standards might not be that great as they sit, but it doesn't mean that the borough doesn't have any teeth at the moment. And you can certainly instruct the land use boards to deal with land use applications with an eye towards those existing regulations. Now, what's going to be missed in the meantime, before the new authorizing ordinance giving HPC its full statutory powers, is the permit review. So if someone comes in to replace all the siding or what have you, the construction official is bound by, state law, and there's no ordinance in place that gives them that permit authority at this juncture. So that's the loophole, I guess you could call it at this moment. So I mean, the design standards are probably going to take a study. They're going to take a while. And I think we should consult again with Michelle as to whether what is more advisable to, the authorizing ordinance at the outset. It sounds like Michelle already has that pretty far along. We could probably get that in place, relatively quickly, perhaps without the design guidelines. If that's not advisable, then we're really kind of stuck where we are right now. But we could get an authorizing ordinance in place and reconstitute the HBC, then they could work with the design professional to develop the design guidelines. That would plug all the holes in the meantime. Might not have a great deal of clarity until the design guidelines are in place, but it addresses the issue that the comments are brought up just now.
Should ask her advice.
Anyone else have any comments?
Hi, Dennis O'Sullivan, 53 Wallace Street, which was built in 2001, but is part of the Washington Street District. Just wanted to compliment Mr. Nato as well. I thought that was very informative. One of the frustrations about living in the district is the lack of clarity on what you are allowed to do and not allowed to do. And I think the design guideline approach would relieve a lot of stress for homeowners as well to, before even approaching the town, to have something to look at and know what's allowed and what's not allowed. And I think, at least as she spoke, it seemed like we could come up with some reasonable approaches that, don't put an overburden on the non-contributing houses like the one I'm living in at the moment. I feel like our district has, I think you mentioned eclectic mix. It's certainly got that. It's literally got a handful of very unique houses with the ornate framing and so forth, but most of the houses are just by definition old. So I would ask it or urge you guys as you dive deeper into this to, I don't know what the original rationale for what the definition of a district is, and to follow on from Dan Reardon's point, how do you become part of a district? What's the rationale? Is it merely the age of the building that gets you there? That doesn't sound like the greatest approach. On the other hand, to touch base with Kate's earlier point, that there's a lot of other areas in town that are equally old and potentially worth imposing or some design standards on them. So I would actually urge you guys to consider a deep integration of the historic preservation knowledge with the planning and the zoning boards. I think we can all point to incidences of approved buildings that just shop, in different circumstances that just seem inappropriate. And it feels like, you come to Red Bank because of the feel of the town, and it can't be just like nobody goes to Washington Street really to see a historic district. It's, if I have visitors in town, I'll go to Irving Place and show them the properties there. I'll go to South Street, Hudson, there's some really beautiful and old properties. Washington Street District really only has a handful of, worthy to be seen houses. So I know we need something. We want to maintain the quality of the town itself, but I feel like the integration with the planning and zoning, these guys have to really understand what the vision for the town is. So it's not just a patchwork What else? And then I guess the last thing is, I just urge you to make the process for residents as easy as possible. I mean, my impression was that to put up a fence, I would have to pay 2 different boards and, a lengthy process to begin with, because you have to approach the Preservation Commission and the Planning Board. My understanding was I had to pay twice. That may turn out not to be true. I certainly hope with the new processes that will not be true. It should be a smooth, single application process. I think if the design guidelines are not clear enough, subjectivity can creep in. You may have overzealous advocates, you may have spiteful neighbors. If it's too burdensome, you might have residents who decide not to improve their properties because they don't want to go through the process. So these things have to be considered, and you may have, demolished by neglect. So what else would I like to say? Oh, the other point. You able to hear? I'm literally 2 inches from the microphone, so I don't know how you can't hear. The last thing I would request that you have more residents from the districts actually on the commission. I think we have 1 right now, but it seems unreasonable to have outsiders dictating what we do in our own district. It would be better to have a community aspect to it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening, Cindy Burnham, 71 Wallace Street. I am in a historic house that I restored. My old house, 65 Wallace Street, was a historic house. It was made a 2-family. And when I bought it in the 80s, I turned it back to a 1-family. And I think a big problem with a lot of the houses close to town that are in the historic district is that we have investors that are buying these multi-families. And of course, investors have money and they want to make more money and they buy these properties and then they don't care how they improve them. And that's what we want to stop. So I would just urge you to stay on this HPC thing. And I had applied to be a volunteer, whatever the heck it was called. I filled out one of those papers. I never got that email. And I think that I should have gotten it as a person that was volunteering for the commission. Don't you?
We didn't appoint anyone. We
What?
didn't appoint anyone to the HPC.
I know, but I had to hear it through another person that you were just decommissioning the commission. It would have been nice to know. That's all I'm saying, Yeah, I think we really have to be careful for investors who are buying up these properties and not repairing in kind. Doing less than what they should. And we have another problem too in the historic district. We have a lot of people who asphalt their front yards. Asphalt, put rocks, pavers. And I said to Tommy Welsh, the code enforcer, I said, Tommy, he's putting rocks in. And he said, well, we can't help that. There's nothing in our code. And that's really how the Historic Preservation Commission got started. Because we needed teeth to protect. Not ungodly protection, but just make sure it's done right and to keep in continuity with the rest of the neighborhood. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone online?
Nobody.
Okay, I have a motion to close the public comments on agenda items only.
So moved.
A second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
No.
Okay. All right, let us move on to some ordinances here. We are talking about the hearing and adoption of NP 2023-08 bond ordinance for Mechanic Street, various road improvements, New Jersey Department of Transportation. Can I have a motion to open the floor for public hearing on this ordinance only? Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone have any comments on this ordinance?
Yeah, I just have a question. Is there like a specific plan for how this is going to actually be utilized? It's not like a really specific description within the bond ordinance. I just wanted to get clarity on what we're using it for.
I can't hear you.
I will speak louder.
Huh?
I'll speak louder.
Get you close.
I asked, I would like a little more detail on what the design will be and what this money is being used for on Mechanic Street, because it was not put into great detail in the ordinance as presented here.
So the road improvement part, not the next ordinance, which is the water sewer, but the road improvement part is to essentially remove the concrete decking that's currently there. That's one of the last streets in Red Bank that has exposed concrete decking. It's to remove that concrete decking, do some curb and sidewalk work, I believe, in areas that need it, and then and driveway aprons that are in disrepair and fit certain criteria that they're borough responsibility, and then to obviously finally repave the roadway. It goes from Spring Street to Gloveport.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anyone? Motion to close the public hearing on this ordinance only.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to adopt ordinance NP 2023-08?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Roll
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Face Blackwood?
Yes?
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tridiano?
Yes.
Mayor Portman.
And Mayor Portman.
Yes.
Sorry.
Next up, a hearing and adoption NP 2023-09 bond ordinance for water sewer improvements lead service. Can I have a
I'll make that
motion? Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any comments from the public on this ordinance only? No, can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make such a motion.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Can I have a motion to adopt ordinance NP 2023-09?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Face Blackwood?
Yes?
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tridiano?
Yes.
Mayor Portman.
Yes. Next up, introduction of NP 2023-10, amending and supplementing chapter 382 graffiti. Can I have a motion to approve the ordinance on introduction?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
So roll call.
Yes. Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Face Blackwood?
Yes?
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tridiano?
Yes.
Mayor Portman.
Yes. We're introduction of NP 2023-11, amending and supplementing chapter 490 height requirements in the waterfront development zone. Can I have a motion to approve the ordinance on introduction?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second?
Roll call.
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Face Blackwood?
Yes?
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tridiano?
Yes.
Mayor Portman.
Yes. And by the way, all of these motions that we're ordinances that we're introducing right now will have a hearing on September 14th. Next up, introduction of NP 2023-12, amending and supplementing chapter 490, planning and development, and chapter 665, trees fee increase. Can I have a motion to approve the ordinance on introduction? Yes. Have a second.
Second?
Roll call.
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Face Blackwood?
Yes?
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tridiano?
Yes.
Mayor Portman.
Yes. Next up is introduction of NP 2023-13, St. Mary's Place, no parking. I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance on introduction. Can I have a second?
Second.
All right, roll call.
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Blackwood?
Yes.
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janelle?
Yes.
Councilmember Trujillo?
Yes.
Mayor Portman?
Yes. And finally, introduction of NP 2023-14, Highland Avenue Residential Parking District. I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance on introduction. Can I have a second?
Second.
And roll call.
Councilmember Bonatakis? Councilmember Cassidy?
Yes.
Councilmember Face Blackwood?
Yes.
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janelle?
Yes.
Councilmember Trujillo?
Yes.
Mayor Portman?
Yes. There we go. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about any of these resolutions before we just approve them all on the consent agenda?
Can we just pull the settlement agreement and do a vote separate for that just because of the severity of it?
Sure.
Thank you.
So then, can I have a motion to approve resolutions NP 2353 through NP 23-59? Have a motion?
So like motion.
Have a second?
Second?
Is that it? All in favor? Yeah, roll call.
The shared services
Oh, shut up.
and the buildings.
The last one.
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy?
Just slip down.
Councilmember Tracy Blackwood?
Yes.
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janelle?
Yes.
Councilmember Trujillo?
Yes.
Mayor Portman?
Yes. And now we'll do separately.
Cassidy coming back?
What's that?
Can we have for Cassidy?
Yeah.
Record his vote after.
A little bit.
Let's vote after. He said-
Record-
The attorney
record his vote.
advises we can record his vote after.
Okay.
Not gonna affect you.
Okay.
All right, so then, NP 23-60 settlement agreement regarding Diane Joy versus Borough of Red Bank. Can I have a motion to approve this resolution?
I'll make that motion.
Have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
I'd like to make a comment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
Just wanted to thank Mr. Reardon for calling in and expressing his concerns about this, and I did listen.
that's it. All right, thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bonatakis?
Yes.
Councilmember Cassidy? Councilmember Tracy Blackwood?
Yes.
Councilmember Forrest?
Yes.
Councilmember Janelle?
Yes.
Councilmember Trujillo?
Yes.
Mayor Portman?
Yes. Discussion and action items. There's a bunch of special events here. If anyone has any questions on any of them, otherwise we can approve them. Yeah.
For number 4, Client Appreciation Day. Who's the client? Who's getting appreciated?
It's a great question. I hope Bonnie has it. Because I didn't go to the special events meeting.
The only thing I noticed is it's a private company.
Oh, private company? Okay. I noticed it's the same day as Porch Fest.
Right.
October 6th, Porch Fest.
I do know that it's not a large enough event that's gonna have any significant impact on our town resources or anything like that. Okay.
I assume this went through the committee.
Yeah, it did.
No.
All right, so then, can I have, do we even have to do a motion to approve special events? Or do we
We
just,
traditionally do.
all right.
Do it for, sorry.
Can I have a motion to approve all these special events on the discussion and action agenda?
I'll make such a motion.
I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Comments? Anyone want to, Christina, you got anything to,
No report this evening, thank you.
all right? Mr. Cassidy?
Two very brief things. First, I was struck coming in at the Carl Colmorgan display, and I encourage everyone to take a look. Carl was a tremendous individual, and just having that display out there brought such a huge smile to my face. It's a compliment to whoever in the borough came up with that, to bring his hats and put some of his history, because So much of this town goes well beyond. We have a nice historic building, but we also have historic individuals, and I would put Mr. Cole Morgan in that. He was a true gentleman, and he's missed, but his presence is here today, and I hope everyone got a smile. And if you didn't on the way out, take a look in because you'll leave with one. And just a note that our 9/11 memorial service will be coming up as we do every year, and that'll be on a Monday. And we do have services planned, and I encourage any residents in the audience to join as well if they are so moved. Thank you.
Real quick, can we, Borough Attorney said we can register your vote for the resolutions when you stepped out.
We did them separately. We did NP 23-53 through.
Yes is the answer. Down the line.
Okay. All right. Nancy.
The Shade Tree Committee thanks you for allowing us to introduce the resolution to increase the fees that are paid to the Shade Tree Trust Fund. That was based on the cost of the tree and then the cost to plant it, as well as the cost to maintain the tree to grow into the next few years. We had our usual council meeting in the morning. Unfortunately, the Wednesday council meeting in the evening had to be inadvertently canceled because the library was closed due to an unforeseen issue. Some of the things that came up was about unhitched trailers. And I know that we have an existing ordinance and that we need to look at about the unhitched trailers and to tighten that up. So I think that's pretty important. So that's about all I'll talk about for now. Thank you.
Right. Ben?
Okay, I'm gonna start out with the request from resident that we look at the Bank Street. Bank Street's very narrow, particularly between Layton Avenue and Shrewsbury. I've had trouble on that street driving myself. It's been at least an incident of, mirrors getting knocked off. So resident, I would like to, I guess, start the process where we looked at that and see it might be better to have that as a one-way street going toward Shrewsbury Avenue from Layton. Obviously, we can't widen it. So, and parking is pretty dense there. So removing parking on one side would be a problem, as parking has become a really big problem on the west side in general. So that's number one. Next will be Parks and Recreation Committee. We had a meeting here on Tuesday, went really well. Our new sports camp sold out. It's almost exclusively Red Bank residents, by the way. It's a multi-sport camp. Also, we did come up with a name for the Halloween name for Red Bank. We're going with Boo Bank. And we actually had 3 or 4 residents suggest Boo Bank, and the subheading will be a trail of fright from broad to white. So Boo Bank. We had quite a large spreadsheet of suggestions. I was actually rather impressed by how many people participated. And if you want to take a look after the meeting, I'll leave us here. Let's see, and I did want to mention that Nancy and I attended a housing authority special meeting on the recent incident there. David wasn't able to make it. It was, it was good. I'm glad we were there. It's good to see residents, and I think it was very heartfelt and direct communication. I don't want to go into the details about it all. It was held over at Montgomery Terrace. And I think it was a good meeting under difficult circumstances. So I want to thank the Housing Authority for organizing it. Let's see. Make sure I got an open bank. Oh, and lastly, had a meeting with the Red Bank Borough Public Schools, of which I'm a former board member, but in this capacity, I was representing us as our liaison, met with their board last week, and we had a nice conversation about the various things we all do together. I think one of them's on the agenda tonight, the special officers. So anyway, so it was a very positive meeting. I actually went to their board meeting So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, unless there's any questions or comments.
Nope, that's it. Laura?
The library committee met. Yeah, we did have to close because there was a plumbing issue, but I went to return books yesterday and just as two women were coming up to talk to the council people, so we were able to meet outside. So there was some complaints from some of the people in the atrium about some traffic and walking issues. So we talked about that. Along with the library, I talked about the AEDs or defibrillators. We are still moving forward on that. We're actually working with Tim Hogan and Riverview Hospital on that. And I had a really productive meeting with them. So that's moving forward. And then Dog Days is September 9th. There's a sign right across Broad Street now, big banner. And then there's one at Johnny Jazz Park and one at the middle school now, all lit up. And so the date is September 9th. And then there's a rain date of September 10th, and that will be in Marine Park. So we're getting a lot of advertising about that. And I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilwoman Triano?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, be on the lookout through River Center and their communicating channels online and everywhere. There's a bunch of different newer events are coming with. One is going to be the Oktoberfest. This will be the first time that they're holding this event in Red Bank in September. It will be in the plaza that's between like the Two River Theater and Triumph in that area. So this will also be the first time that there's a River Center held event in that part of town. It'll be showcasing craft breweries, craft beer, and it's also a partnership with Asbury Fresh, which if you've ever attended one of their markets, they're extremely well curated with local businesses and local makers. So it's cool to see a bit of a new direction there. And then I wanted to, well, I'm a part of it, but I can't ignore that part. But the fire department, we had our first field day team in 27 years. We went and we competed in the county. It's all firematics. So it's with the truck, it's with hoses and everything. It's a great community building day. We had members from all different houses in Red Bank and we all formed a team. Like I said, for the first time in 27 years. And we received a trophy. We got second place in busted hose. So it was just a really nice day. It was a really great community day. I really live for stuff like that. I like when people get together and, you know, we actually do things. And it was a lot of, some people, most of the guys even younger than me, you know, and they're all just saying, you know, this is the best. So everybody should be really proud. A lot of the teams we're up against, they practice a lot all year long and they've been doing it for a long time. We already told Colts Neck that we'll be back. That's where they hold it. So that was awesome. And that's basically it. Thanks.
I just want to mention that I spent Saturday at the lunch break picnic over at Count Basie. Saw some folks there, very well attended. Hotter day than I thought it would be. I ended up playing in the lunch break softball tournament. My body still hurts.
You wound up playing like all day, right?
Yeah, I played like 20 innings. I was crippled. It was great. 18. We kept trying to figure out if we could just forfeit. You guys were up by like 6 runs, but no, anyway, it was a great time. Had the same feeling of being out in the community. It's nice. So, let's, move on to, can I have a motion to open up the floor for public question and comments?
So moved.
I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, Jimmy, you want to come on up now?
Jimmy Dark, 48 West Sunset Avenue. The question pertains to Red Bank site. You know, we drop off your, your cans, bottles and stuff. Can it go back like it used to be? It used to be open like Monday through Saturday. And then in hours is going down to 2 o'clock. And it would be nice because you see people going down there and they say, I thought it was still open like till like 3:30. And I think that would be a good thing that people, you see people come down the street, asking questions generally. It would be more compassion to go back to like it used to be. This way people don't have to play a second game. And then the sign on the thing, you have to take a magnifying glass to see the time on the thing, even with glasses. And it would be good if you put a nice time when, when it opened and closed, that would be a good thing for anybody. They want to second guess. I want to say, oh, excuse me, I don't know. You have to go down. They said, look at the sign. You put your glasses on, magnifying glass. And the next thing too is website. It was what my attention. And I didn't even think about that. They said, can you update the website? A lot of people have been going on the website and they said that you can't really figure it out. So they said, and I said, when I go down there generally, and I said, I didn't even think about that. And they said it would help a whole lot because then you can go on the website and find out right away. And they said it would be good for anybody because don't have to put people in uproar. What I'm gonna do, I don't have time. But if it's 4 o'clock, even go to Saturday, Saturday. I didn't know the time. I told them it's maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, but this would help a whole lot, keep things cleaned up and everything. So basically that's basically that's the main thing. And I would hope you all take this in consideration. Even one day, just go down and check this out sometime. Because if you were just like a caravan going down, they see a car, 3 or 4 cars and going down and coming back up. But thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone online there?
Yes, Mary Jennifer Garcia. Ms. Garcia, you have the floor.
Okay, hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's Jennifer Garcia, 30 Drummond Place. And I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, not as the Board of Ed member in Red Bank. But first I want to say thank you to Kate. I had sent her a message and she instructed me kind of proper protocol for my question, which I appreciate. And I did what she asked and I sent it over to you, Mayor Portman, and to the clerk. And I just thought I had a chance tonight to just jump on. So I just had a question specifically for Mayor Portman about the process for hiring a new BA. I know that we have, like with the new structure of the council and the mayor and the new roles and structure, kind of how that process works. And is it a part of the process to involve the community as part of like a vetting committee or of any potential candidates? So the reason it came up was because I was thinking, when Dr. Moore was hired as the Red Bank Regional superintendent there at the school, they usually do form a committee of community members and parents in that case that helped kind of vet and help interview some of the candidates for that role. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that and if you thought it was something that could be beneficial in this case or is already happening or part of the process.
We actually have some personnel issues to discuss in executive session today. And one of the reasons I had not gotten back to you, and I did get your email and thank you, was I'm hopeful that this will all be finalized in what direction we're going as far as the hiring of the BA process goes. Going to consult with the attorney about it as well. So I'm hopeful to have an answer to you shortly.
Oh, cool. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Yes.
Ethel Brandon, 12 Oak Street. I just wanted to say thank you to all the council members that came to the block party that we had. It was very nice to see everybody there. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you all.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to be there.
That was a good party.
Anyone else? No, can I have a motion to close the public comments?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I don't remember the order of this, but I do a.
I have a motion to adjourn to executive session.
I'll make such a motion.
Anyone need
I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
anyone need 5 minutes?
I think 5 minutes.
Bio break.
5 minutes.
For the public's benefit, the executive session will be about 45 minutes to an hour and there will be no action taken afterwards. Don't they do it in the school?